plan with these two components is to lead a shift to a more inclusive geosciences culture where all people feel safe and welcome to bring all aspects of themselves. So just a little bit about the Landing Academy. It is a 2-year program. It is cohort-based. There are 10 to 15 fellows in each cohort, and the program consists of in-person, hybrid, and virtual meetings that are rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarship. It's professional development throughout the 2 years, and the latter part of the year is, the latter part of the second year, or the latter part of the academy, is focused on a broadening participation project, wherein the academy fellows take what they have learned for the first year and apply it at their institution to create change. The Landing Academy Cohort 2 applications are open, so please consider joining us and applying for the program. The deadline is June 1st of this year at midnight. And the application you can find there at that URL. I also put it at the end of this talk. And I want to emphasize here that the second cohort of Academy participants will focus on building capacity for those individuals at mid-career and in positions to affect change at a U.S. academic adjacent, or research institutions. And there are a lot of reasons why we are doing it this way, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have. But for this second time, we're looking for mid-career applicants. And if you've got any questions at all, please email us at landing@agu.org. But I want to go ahead and move on to the other part of the Landing project, the Community of Practice. The Community of Practice, or the COP, is a registered access virtual platform of resources to develop virtual and in-person events to engage and support a broad community of current and aspiring DEI champions. And before Landing launched the Community of Practice, there was no collective community to support diversity, equity, and inclusion champions' networking and professional development needs for geoscientists, or earth and space scientists specifically. And so what the Community of Practice offers is training, scholarly resources, policy documents, peer mentoring, and promotion of opportunities to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a dedicated community manager, and we also have community ambassadors. And these are people who are active in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work within the earth and space sciences. And they are our partners in facilitating discussions and structuring and setting up the Community of Practice. There are a lot of what we think are great features of the Community of Practice, like a resource library with right now over 700 resources. We have a section in the COP on language, because language is fluid and always changing. And so this is a place where we hope people go to learn about that. We also have a place for DEI news and events, so things that happen within institutions and also within the world that are of interest to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. We'd like to invite you to the Community of Practice webinar series, and this series highlights a variety of DEI champions' personal journeys and impacts and lessons they've learned along the way. The next one is going to be May 25th by Dr. Raj Pandya. He is the Vice President of Thriving Earth Exchange at AGU. And then we have Dr. Marshall Shepard speaking in June, and he is a Professor of Geography and Atmospheric Sciences from the University of Georgia. And I want to end with this. This is our newest part of Landing. This is Landing PRFP. or a postdoctoral research fellows program within the Leadership Academy and Network for Diversity and Inclusion in the Geosciences. And our goal with landing PRFP is that it would fill a gap in the landscape of professional development resources for early career Earth and space scientists. So there are two goals. One is to leverage the landing community of practice resource to provide a curated learning experience for postdoc scholars. And then the second is to build professional networks for diversity, equity, and inclusion champions among postdoc scholars and among other diversity, equity, inclusion leaders. I think of it as kind of a hybrid between an academy and a community of practice. This is also a 2-year program. Right now, we have National Science Foundation funding for Division of Ocean Sciences and Office of Polar Program postdoctoral scholars, but we have plans to expand this to all postdoctoral scholars, regardless of NSF funding. There's about 30 hours of professional development involved. We also have hybrid summits and meetings, and we have a recognition reception at the end of the PRFP program. And so I'll end with this. Our vision for landing the academy plus the community of practice plus the postdoc program is that we think this will have very high impact potential, putting DEI champions out into the Earth and space sciences world to champion change, to shift to a more inclusive geosciences. We have broad partnerships with other associations. We're actively looking for other partnerships in other sectors. And the model that we have is sustainable. We have NSF funding for 4 to 5 years, and AGU is very much involved and committed to this project. And so we will have landing very well into the future. So thank you so much. And at the end of this, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Margaret. Appreciate that. I now have the opportunity to introduce Lisa White. So Billy mentioned it takes a village or takes a team to keep us all focused on our DEI commitment, and Lisa is very much a leader in that effort. Lisa is the Director of Education and Outreach at the University of California Museum of Paleontology. Since 2019, she's also served as the chair of the AGU Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee. She's a former professor of geosciences and associate dean of the College of Sciences and Engineering at San Francisco State University. She was elected to the California Academy of Sciences in 2000 and is a fellow of the Geological Society of America in 2009. Dr. White was awarded her PhD in 1989 from the University of California, Santa Cruz. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Lisa, I was motivated by Billy's sharing of personal stories and motivation. And my first question to you is, I'm going to share a personal story because you and I received our PhD in the same year. Mm-hmm. And my story is that when I defended my PhD, I was about 2 weeks away from delivering my first child. And at the end of my defense, which I passed happily, there was a reception, and one of my committee members came up to me and said he was sorry to see that I was expecting a child because he was hoping that I would have a career in science. Not exactly the remark that I wanted, but I was thinking, wow, that was a long time ago. And in the early part of my career also, I was repeatedly told that if I paid attention to mentoring and diversity, that people would think I was less serious about my science. And so I wanted to ask you, was there a time, Lisa, over the span of your career where you also were worried about spending time on these issues that you care very passionate about?
Absolutely. And I remembered even in graduate school at UC Santa Cruz, getting involved in some outreach projects from, supporting science fairs in town to mentoring African-American undergraduates at Santa Cruz because they were so isolated. But I had to do it on the sneak because, there was so much unspoken attitude, discouraging, especially early careers from working on diversity and inclusion and mentoring and, collaborative efforts that were outside the department. So I know we'll touch on this later, but it just gives me so much pleasure to see the role now of some early career scientists in our network at really leading change, particularly in some of the upcoming conferences that they're going to lead.
So do you think that, I'm going to call it a stigma. So do you think that stigma is gone, Lisa?
Well, it's not quite gone, but thanks to a number of programs and efforts, Margaret highlighted the wonderful Landing Academy. There is more prioritization of DEI and DEI practices. And with everything we've been through as a society and as a STEM discipline the last 2 years, you really can't turn away now from the need to prioritize diversity and inclusion, to really accept opportunities, to seek training in those areas. There's a no excuses now, really culture that we're in, where it really does need to be central to most everything that we do, because whether we're answering the call to workforce training in the future, or really putting plans to action when it comes to collaborative effort and partnerships. You can't do any of that effectively and grow our science without building more diversity and inclusion in who that you're partnering with. So I'd like to think we're now on the other end of really accepting the need for change.
I share that optimism. I'll also add that, of course, we have professional societies, university institutes, our federal agencies prioritizing it. And I keep saying, yes, but we need to make sure that when we promote and reward individuals, we need to, if that is a priority, we need to make sure that we also reward people for work in that area. So I do think those of us that are in leadership positions at universities, institutes, et cetera, we need to be more broad in terms of what work counts, because clearly there's work involved here.
Right.
So, Lisa, Billy, and Margaret did a great job talking about AGU's, programs and just sort of the impact they're having. But I was wondering if you could give us a little inside look in terms of the work of the committee. So you've been in the chair of AGU's DEI Advisory Committee since 2019. And what do you think, or what would you say are the main issues that your group grapples with?
Well, there are a number of them, and I've been very fortunate to chair this committee. The members are terrific. They're active in DI, and they came to the committee, really passionate and motivated to make change. Like me, many of them are longtime members. I joined AGU when I was an undergraduate. Having gone to college in the Bay Area, and specifically my undergraduate years at San Francisco State, it was easy to just go down to the fall meeting every year. Mm-hmm. And I remember when it was at one hotel, the Jack Tar Hotel in San Francisco, and it was a great opportunity to meet scientists that were in town for that. So when I think about my own experience as an AGU member and now in a leadership position, it's been terrific to really work closely with AGU leadership. We're proud as a committee of being able to advise the new dashboard that launched a couple of years ago. So members can, and even non-members can just better track who is part of AGU, who publishes, how well, or maybe we don't do it so well sometimes, just track representation and participation. It's also been terrific as a member of the committee and chair of the committee to influence the kinds of sessions and programming at fall meeting. There's just really been an explosion of opportunities for individuals active in DEI efforts to share their work. And whether it's informal sessions or town halls or informal gatherings, we've really seen an increase in that, certainly during my time as chair. And there are ways also that the work of individual members of the committee and the priorities of AGU as a large professional organization intersect. I was part of a team that led No Time for Silence, So really recommending strategies and efforts to really change the culture in earth science, whether you're at a funding federal agency or at a university, just putting forth really no excuse, actionable steps to change. And so at the same time that was happening, AGU released that 8 action areas to combat systemic racism. So it's been really terrific to just be in step on those efforts and feel like you're influencing, a major earth and space science organization when it comes to DEI.
Yeah, and importantly, I'll add that for those 8 steps and other actions, we do have our metrics that are put in place that's really led by Billy, because we know many of us have been talking about DEI for decades, but it's really nice to have some measurable action that can be measured with those metrics. I'm going to ask you one more question. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience to you and Billy and also Margaret. So Lisa, I know this is almost impossible to answer, but if you could change one thing, what do you think could really accelerate our efforts to increase the diversity in geosciences? We saw those charts that Margaret had up and sort of the whiteness of the geosciences. I don't know, or maybe it's just all these collective efforts we need to make, but is there something you wish that we could accelerate that would really have a step change in our diversity?
Yeah, it's tough because there's so many areas that we need to continue to work on and prioritize and change. But, a lot of my current position at the Museum of Paleontology is about communicating science. So just getting researchers, graduate students, lead PIs to think about how others see their work. And the more skilled we can be at sharing our science, emphasizing the importance of what it is that we do, and exciting others about the work of Earth, ocean, space science, then I think that is key, because we, of course, have been told for so long, we're the least diverse of all the sciences, but we've also often heard that Earth scientists traditionally haven't been very good at sharing what it is about their work that's important. So I think if we can turn that corner more, if we can be better communicators and get more buy-in from other individuals and get excitement around the fundamental aspects and importance of what we do, then maybe that is kind of a different area of priority to get others to build that kind of awareness that may lead them to want to pursue areas of our discipline.
I like that. I also, while you were talking, I was thinking of that. We also need, I think, more personalization and show more passion about the, in addition to being able to describe our science, but also show that passion and personalization. I was reminded of a quote last week in the New York Times. They were interviewing Ferrier Ozel, who led the large collaboration that took the first photos of the black hole at the center of our galaxy, and it was released last week. And one of the first things she said at the press conference, she said, 20 years ago, I fell in love with black holes. And she just went on and sort of described this personal journey about her, love for the science. And so I appreciate you saying that we can all be better communicators. Speaking of communication, I'm going to stop talking and ask anyone here or online if they have any questions for Billy, Margaret, or Lisa. Please come to the mics. And please go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'm Jen Reeve at the University of Colorado Boulder. I have 2 questions, both of which I think are for all 3 of you or whoever feels like they can best answer it. The first is AGU working on tracking disability as a metric for diversity and inclusion, and what initiatives are being worked on to increase diversity and inclusion for disabled community members?
Billy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say that AGU is prioritizing our efforts towards access for all. Tracking is a little bit more difficult because there are people with disabilities who don't disclose. So unless until we find a way that individuals are disclosing any disabilities they might have, it's difficult to track. But we do try to accommodate. I think if you will see in almost all AGU meetings, especially our large meetings, we always ask, is there any accommodations you need in attending the meetings? And we always go out of our way to try to accommodate that. So it is certainly on our radar as we think about what Margaret disclosed in the Landing Academy. There's emphasis there. There's even a community that's led there around the whole issue of access and making sure we're totally inclusive. So there's a lot more we need to do. It is on our radar, but if you ask me today, what's the metrics or the numbers behind our progress, I could not give you that, but it's certainly something we're working towards.
Thank you. Heather, is someone tracking the questions if anything's coming in the chat? There's nothing. Okay, all right, but someone will let me know if there is. All right.
So second,
Yes, go
very
ahead.
different topic question. I really appreciate that we have added or established that harassment is a form of scientific misconduct. I'm curious what consequences there are or we could work towards developing within AGU for those people who are essentially protecting the harassers or who are enabling, because that is a significant consequence on the community when there's someone who, pushes those reports off to the side, but those community members oftentimes face significantly less consequences than those who are actively doing any harassment, despite causing similar levels of damage.
You want to talk about our ethics?
Yeah, so
policy?
that's another great question and point. We spend a lot of time on following up with anyone who's feeling any issues around retaliation or discomfort or ethics related. You'd be surprised at how much time we actually spend on that and the follow-up on that. The whole issue on those who enable, it's kind of tough to get your arms around it unless somebody is specifically pointing out who those other individuals are, whether we can actually point to within home institutions what is actually transpired. Our other limitation is in a lot of cases, if that's happening within a home institution, we really, in AGU, don't have a means or reach into a home institution to address those items. So we ask people to be forthcoming and try to support them in coming forward, just knowing that we are going to support you when you come forward. And the other thing that you probably, I'm sure you don't know, is that as we follow up on cases, we don't make them. We provide a broad report at the end of each year about the actions we're taking, but we don't give specifics. So unless you are actually involved in the case, you probably would not know, but anyone who's involved in bringing complaints is made fully aware of the actions and consequences. And I think we have a proud track record. I know
We do.
Susan's been involved with us following up on all the cases that are brought to our attention.
Yeah, just as a follow-up of that, we do have an AGU ethics chair that is the past president. So when complaints come in to the AGU staff, those complaints, I'm going to say we have an AGU jurisdiction. Complaints come in about people's behavior at meetings or through the publication process, anything that touches AGU. Billy and his staff handle those complaints. Some of them rise to the case where we need to have an ad hoc committee that investigates that. And there are consequences. People have been barred from meetings. People have been barred from publication. In severe cases, people's membership can be taken away. So some of those cases come to the board, either the executive committee or the AGU board as a whole, in cases where I'm going to say punishment, but the consequences of those rise to the level such that the board should be aware. So in the 4 years that I've been involved with this, I've been very proud of the process. But as Billy said, the members themselves aren't always aware of this, even though, things come in and we do move them through the system. So happy to talk to you more about that if you want to know about the process.
If I could just add one other thing. In our efforts at AGU, we pride ourselves more on being ethics educators as opposed to being ethics police. We do police, but we also try to educate.
Yeah. Jen, hi. A familiar
Thank
face.
you. Thank you so much for being here and for leading this session and for all you do for these efforts. We had an amazing Sunday workshops on bystander intervention as well. I know you partner with the Advanced Geo program, and that's absolutely fantastic. And I know they have a new paper out on the as well for folks to check out on critical feminist theory for bystander intervention and effects of that. Anyway, my question relates to something I've been thinking about with regard to kind of fundraising and money for DEI in scientific societies such as AGU, and what can we as a community do to boost the funding basically for the grassroots efforts that are just springing up. It's so wonderful to see, but a lot of them are not quite supported financially to the levels where they could be. So, what can we do to kind of accelerate that fundraising for the grassroots DEI committees? Thank you.
I'm going to start with that, but really hand it over to Billy. And I will say that AGU, when started investing in DEI initiatives really as a strategic, initiatives. And so resources that came in from elsewhere. But now at this point, the programs that Billy talked about and Margaret talked about were really getting outside, funding from federal agencies and also from foundations. So it could be that, Billy said we don't want to police ethics, we want to educate. It could be that AGU also is helping others, educating others about how to get those resources. So, Billy, do you want to talk about how we've been successful in the funding side of things?
Thank you. That's a great question. I want to have
Or-
Lisa and Margaret also have a chance to answer some questions, but from an external funding standpoint, as Susan said, in DEI, AGU was funding a lot of the work early on, and now we're getting to the point where the work of that funding has provided some seed, and now it's attracting because people are seeing the consequence of the work. So we're seeing additional funds become available externally, and we've been fortunate to secure some of those funds. But what we're seeing now is an explosion of interest and additional funding opportunities that we actually partner with others to help them secure funds as well. So I can't tell you how many letters of support we write for other groups who are trying to get funding, and we always try to collaborate and cooperate with any group we think has a great idea and offer them additional AGU resources in terms of our ability to amplify their work or devise spaces or whatever we can do to support them. So if you are aware, anyone in this room who are aware of initiatives that you might be considering and are securing funding for, we're happy to talk with you about that. If there's a way that AGU can help support your efforts, let us know. Our staff is small, but we're mighty. But we value the ability to scale up and have additional impact through partnership with others. And so that's part of our strategy going forward.
Actually, it's nice to think of that as well because, Jen, a lot of times if there's a group at a university or institute and they have a one-off program, right? And it's nice to think about where could we, get some funding to be part of this larger effort. And we can think about, like Billy said, AGU is willing to write those letters of support. Lisa or Margaret, do you have anything to add to what Billy said? Lisa, I see you nodding.
I am nodding. I wanted to mention the possibility of just exploring some of the private foundations when it comes to funding DEI efforts. So Black in Marine Science, which started as a Twitter hashtag following and did some weeks that focused on Black scientist participation in marine science. They recently received a 2-year award from the Packard Foundation, which will fund a full-time individual to really manage and grow the program. And so I found that very promising for maybe future opportunities to build what started really as grassroots, organizations and efforts to grow. And the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which does tend to fund a lot of earth and environmental science-related efforts, is also starting to really look at DEI efforts within the earth and earth sciences. So just wanted to mention those two private foundations.
Thank you, Lisa. Margaret, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I'll just add that with the National Science Foundation, the two review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts, the broader impacts is a great place to put in the those kinds of projects and efforts. And NSF has gotten recently a lot of additional funding to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. So talk to your program officer, and this is, as a former program officer, talk always to your program officers about any idea. The Directorate for Geosciences is very much, I think, on the cutting edge of these things, so definitely seek them out.
Thank you, Margaret. Any other questions? Jen?
Ask another one.
Yeah.
We have the time.
Yeah, happy to have your question.
So there's also some things I've heard that that universities can do to help with this. And I'm wondering if there's ways that societies like AGU can kind of put together like a little tally or checklist of easy things that universities can change, like
Oh.
the reimbursement. And I know you
Well, no, you mean like best,
Closure are
well,
doing this,
well,
but changing things like reimbursement, instead of reimbursement, fronting the funds, right? That's a big thing. A lot of students don't have, particularly from, poorer socioeconomic backgrounds, cannot front the funds or don't feel comfortable asking, to front the funds. So that's something. And I know we've recently, I think, changed that at Georgia Tech, but it seems like it was under you that it changed. So maybe other schools don't know that it needs changing. And what else? There's some other, GRE, obviously there's the big
Right.
movement for that, but like
Right.
a little checklist of
I like
things
that.
to make sure, just
Yeah.
an idea.
No, actually, no, it's very interesting because some things might seem small, right, to us, but they are hurdles. And so it could be here's a list of things that, that you can do. Some may take, just 10 minutes. Nothing takes 10 minutes, but some may take a short amount of time and others could be a longer investment. But I think that's nice. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and just building on that, I know the iGen program that I mentioned, where the AGU Bridge is part of that. The program is not just about supporting students, it's also about supporting those inclusive practices in the organizations, in the institutions they're going to. So the departments have to not only abide by, but they share their practices for what makes an inclusive department that's going to attract and retain these students. And some of the practices you're talking about, I'm sure, are part of the things being discussed there. So there's a way we could probably more proactively share those practices beyond just those institutions who are part of IGN. So that's a great point.
Thank you. I'm going to close this session just with one observation, actually based on Jen's question. They're absolutely, AGU is doing a lot. The universities have work to do, and we can come up with a to-do list. But I think it's always important for us to remember what we can do, as individuals. And I think one of the most important things we can do is to share our stories, regardless of what we look like. All of us have had struggles as we move through our scientific careers. And oftentimes I think students don't see those struggles. They think that there's just sort of one path that's paved for certain people that look a certain way in science. And so I think to the degree to which we can share our personal stories with students and encourage them and mentor them is a great way that we personally can really create a more diverse and inclusive and supportive community. So with that, I'm going to thank all of you here, small but mighty group there, and hopefully the people who have joined us virtually appreciate your commitment. Enjoy the rest of AbSciCon.